What's your perfect day?
April 24th or something.
Too hot, not too cold. You just need a light jacket.
A light sweater. Jacket.
Hello, Wanderers. I'm Jess.
And I'm Hannah.
And welcome to Wicked Wanderings.
Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Jess.
I just said Hannah really weird. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
How's it going?
It's going. I'm here with you, so I'm happy. How are you?
Oh, shucks. Listen to you. We're crying over here at Wicked Wanderings. Are you ready to be finished with the Salem Witch Trials?
It's been a long road, but you have done an amazing job. You could have wrote a thesis paper.
I could have done like a whole season on each part of it, pretty much. And I went down a rabbit hole. I was not prepared for that rabbit hole.
Were you Alice?
Yes. And so I've given you guys a lot of information and I've enjoyed it and it's been a lot. So that's what she said. So let's get started with our final episode of the Salem Witch Trials. We left off last week of the creation of the court of Oyer and Terminer, right? And then I gave you an extensive history of the first 30 or so people who had been accused in 4 months. I can't possibly go through the 200-ish people that would eventually be accused of witchcraft. I want to, only because I feel as though they should be acknowledged for the bullshit that they went through. And I also have a low-key fear of being lost to history myself. But that is a conversation for me and my therapist, not the podcast. So for this final episode, I want to focus on those that were executed, and wrongfully, in my opinion. And I think you all have gathered how biased I am and how ridiculous I think the trials are by now. And as we will see, it seems that after the trials ended, everyone else did too. It seems that Salem and Salem Village wanted to move on from the embarrassment and the wrongs that were done. There are very little personal accounts from that time, and a lot was destroyed in the aftermath. Didn't know if you knew that.
No, I did not. So they got rid of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of the court documents survived, but a lot of people who kept journals didn't have anything for that year, which is they wrote every day. And so if a year's missing,
sus.
Yeah. So I think people were wanting to forget, but I am glad that we have the trial transcripts that we do. But let's continue. So I gave you a visual and you might need that now. Let me grab mine that I forgot where I put it.
And we're going to add this to...
Yes, I will add this and I will make more when this episode airs. So it should be on the Instagrams. Before we get into the trials, let's talk about the justices of the court of Oyer and Terminer. I've put the family tree connection between some of them on our Instagram. So check that out at Wicked Wanderings Podcast. There were 9 in total, and there were some changes along the way as well. The Chief Justice is William Stoughton, and the other magistrates are the OG Peckerheads, John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin. Then we have Samuel Sewell, Bartholomew Gedney, John Richards, Nathaniel Saltonstall, Peter Sargent, and Waitstill Winthrop. So this is going to get a little messy to explain. So like I said, check out our Instagram. And I've already given Hannah my copy. So let's see if I can do this. John Richards is Wait Winthrop's brother-in-law. John is married to Wait's sister, Anne Winthrop. Wait's other sister, Margaret Winthrop, married John Corwin. But don't confuse John Corwin with Jonathan Corwin. Jonathan Corwin is the magistrate, and John Corwin is his brother, but he's not the magistrate. Confused yet?
I mean, this is helping.
Okay.
And I think you'll help our wanderers too, because I'm such a visual person.
Yeah.
It's like they only had 5 names to pick from back then.
Like Mary, Martha, Sarah, Jonathan, Thomas,
William,
yes.
And a shit ton of Marys.
Yeah, fucking Marys. Okay, so basically Jonathan Corwin, the magistrate, is the brother of Wait Winthrop's brother-in-law.
Okay.
However, Margaret Winthrop and John Corwin, not the magistrate, have a son named George Corwin.
Got it.
George Corwin was the sheriff at the time, and he was the one that was going around confiscating the accused properties.
Oh. Okay.
So George Corwin is the nephew of both magistrates Waite Winthrop and Jonathan Corwin. George married Lydia Gedney, who happens to be the daughter of Magistrate Bartholomew Gedney. Now, Magistrate Jonathan Corwin has two sisters. Actually, he has three, but we're just talking about two of them. Elizabeth Corwin, who is married to Magistrate Peter Sargent, and Abigail Corwin, who is married to Eleazar something or other Hawthorne, whose brother is John Hawthorne. So John Hawthorne is the in-law of Jonathan Corwin's sister. So basically, what all of that says...
Incest.
Well, not quite. Maybe. I don't know. So 6 of the 9 justices are related somehow through blood and marriage. That's basically what that boils down to.
It looks like a clusterfuck to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it fits with the times. All of Salem was a clusterfuck. All of these men were well-read, widely traveled, men of integrity, and familiar with the workings of the court. But they didn't have any specific legal training. They represented the wealthy and the elite of the colony. And the shitty thing for the accused is that they didn't have any representation. And lawyers weren't really common in New England at the time. And this is before the Revolutionary War, so there is no Constitution or Bill of Rights. And according to Emerson Baker in his book, The Storm of Witchcraft, he says, for a generation, magistrates had in fact been an important brake on the general public's eagerness to prosecute witches, whom they feared and blamed for their misfortunes. Most judges grew skeptical about previously used ways of establishing that someone was a witch. And some even began to question the existence of witches. But for some reason, in 1692, the Salem judges would reverse course. This is important. Their participation in the trials shaped the outcomes, the conviction and the execution of 19 innocent people. No matter how many accusers suffered what they believed were genuine afflictions or conspired to press dubious charges, no one would have died without the sanction of the judges. It's all their fault. As a group, they represented the proverbial 1%, the merchant elite who were wealthy, intermarried, and exercised power in social, political, and military circles. Some of the judges had been present for witch trials in the years leading up to Salem, which may have influenced their decisions here. An important thing to note is that the Salem witch trials heavily relied on spectral evidence. Spectral evidence is defined as acts carried out by the devil that only the accuser can see. The Puritans genuinely believed that the devil could create such harmful specters. He tricked witches into believing that his powers were theirs. But how much weight should be given to the claim that a person was harmed by a spirit or specter of a person when only the afflicted witnessed the manifestation? So if only Ann Putnam could see people flying through the air, why should we be paying attention to her?
Because she's a Putnam.
Fucking Putnams. But at that time, to doubt a specter was to doubt God's existence, since such powers were ultimately derived by God, for he had created Satan. Before the trials even started, John Richards wrote to his minister, Cotton Mather, for advice. Mather urged caution over the use of spectral evidence and believed that Richards should not lay more stress upon pure specter testimony than it will bear. So, before the courts even started, or the official trials even started, they were all questioning the use and reaching out to the ministers. Bridget Bishop was the first to be tried in the first session of the Court of Oyer and Terminer. That began on June 2nd, 1692. The justices thought Bishop's case would be an easy one because it presented the strongest evidence for conviction. She had previously been charged with witchcraft, and she had often been before the court. Both she and her second husband, Thomas Oliver, had been convicted several times of domestic violence, one case taking place on the Sabbath. As a poor, quarrelsome, and suspicious woman, Bishop fit everyone's idea of a witch. A total of 10 witnesses testified against her and her strange behavior, dating back to the 1670s, even though she was already acquitted from those charges in 1679.
Oh, so this is the second time?
Yeah. But I almost went off on a rant here because I was like, hey, me being a crime junkie, in my mind, if she was already acquitted of those charges
right,
in 1679, how can they bring them back? But Also, that's looking at it through a 2023 lens and not a 1692 lens. The most damning evidence for Bridget came from John Bly and his son William, who had been hired by Bishop in 1685 to carry out some repairs on her home. When they went down to the cellar, they found holes between the stones in the wall with several poppets made of rags with headless pins in them with the points outward. So this was considered voodoo.
They were voodoo dolls.
It was basically what's considered voodoo dolls today. They did not provide the dolls as evidence, however, but this testimony would have been viewed as tangible proof of black magic, far more damning than spectral evidence. Now here is your favorite part, Hannah. Can you guess what it is?
Witchcraft.
Well, yeah. But a panel of 9 women and a surgeon, John Barton, examined Bishop for teats.
Oh, boy.
For our wanderers out there who haven't listened to episode 3 or 4, we explain teats are the devil's marks on a witch that their familiar will suckle on. Go listen. Episode 3 and 4. Actually, just start at 1 and binge, please. After a diligent search, the group found an abnormal growth between her vagina and anus that was not usual for a woman. That is how thorough these exams were.
Wow.
Bishop had a teat, but the messed up thing was she had to go through another examination several hours later, and the teat had disappeared and was replaced by dry skin.
What?
So she had 9 people all up in her business looking for a teat between her vagina and anus.
So they probably could have found something that was like cancerous on her, and yet she's going to die for witchcraft.
Yeah. Rob, are you okay with the word vagina?
Yeah, vagina's fine with me.
Okay. I'm just making sure every time I said it, you're kind of like, vagina. Yeah, so she had to go through a second examination, and by the time the jury began their deliberation, there was little doubt of outcome. Bridget was found guilty and sentenced to hang. On Friday, June 10, 1692, Sheriff Corwin and his men led Bridget from the jail to common land at the outskirts of Salem town, to the place that would later be known as Gallows Hill. And Bridget was hanged by the neck until she was dead. Fucking Puritans. Everything seemed to quiet down for a short period after Bridget's execution. Only 3 people claimed to be afflicted by the specters, and no new suspects were jailed. Some may have thought the worst was over, but they were wrong. On June 16th, Roger Toothaker, I think I mentioned him in the last episode, died in the Boston prison while awaiting trial. This would be the 3rd death related to the trials. The first signs of opposition to the trials began to appear. Judge Nathaniel Saltonstall resigned from the court of Oyer and Terminer. He was the only one of the judges who wasn't related by some connection to the other judges. He lived in Haverhill and not in Salem, and it was widely known that he was very dissatisfied with the proceedings.
I'm sorry.
Did I say it wrong? Haverhill? 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 Worcester? I'm going to get my Worcestershire sauce. These Bostonians.
I didn't hear anything else you said except Haverhill.
Haverhill. It's Haverhill.
Yes.
You know what? I need to live here 12 years before I get that right. I got Worcester right.
I can give you that much time.
Well, if the podcast continues, you're going to have to. Sorry. Haverhill got me lost. So he lived in Haverhill and not Salem, and it was widely known, Hannah, that he was very dissatisfied with the proceedings.
Thank you.
Just wait until you try to pronounce Utah towns.
Oh, I got this.
Challenge accepted. There would even be claims that his specter afflicted people. So he quit because he didn't agree with it, and then people were claiming that his specter was out and about.
His what?
Yeah. So once he quit and wasn't satisfied with everything going on, then people started to accuse him.
Oh, brother.
And that's something that we begin to see with the people that speak out against the witch trials. And he got off pretty well because he didn't get executed like some of the others.
So you have to be in cahoots if you don't agree with something?
Yeah, it's common. An interesting thing that I didn't know was that on June 13th, Governor Phipps met with his council with 4 of the judges. Stoughton, Sewell, Winthrop, and Sargent were present. According to Baker, the council asked a group of leading ministers of the colony for their opinion in the handling of the witchcraft proceedings. The ministers responded 2 days later. Their response was penned by Cotton Mather, which, keep in mind, had already spoken to Richards about the same matter before the trials even started. The ministers showed support for the judge's difficult task. While they raised serious doubts about the use of spectral evidence, they were vague and encouraged the speedy and vigorous prosecutions. Ignoring or not fully understanding the ministers' concerns about the spectral evidence, the judges interpreted this statement as a green light to continue with the prosecutions. On June 25th, Governor Phipps and his council received 2 petitions complaining about that use of spectral evidence. One was a Baptist minister who warned that several persons of good fame and unspotted reputation sat in jail solely upon specter testimonies and warned that a woeful chain of consequences will undoubtedly follow. But the over-reliance on spectral evidence would also put everyone in the colony under the possibility of accusation, which wasn't received well by the governor as the complainer was the Baptist for one. How dare he? But he was also the brother of a rebel in New York who was recently executed. Phipps summoned the minister before the council to explain his scandalous and seditious paper and required him to pay a 200-pound bond to prevent a repeat of such an outburst. The Puritans were not open to receiving any criticism to their work on the trials.
Of course not.
Men and their penises. The court reconvened on June 28th. I'm glad my mom doesn't listen. Maybe she will. And maybe she'll like it.
What would you say? Jessica!
She would. Oh, I'm grabbing my pearls. I do declare. The court reconvened on June 28th with 5 women facing the court, and all would be convicted of witchcraft. Sarah Good was the first name on the docket. Several of the afflicted girls testified of her specter attacking them. What are you laughing about over there?
There's specter attacking them.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's ridiculous. What was worse was that many of the confessed witches, including Tituba, had named Good in their confessions, saying she flew on a broomstick and had animal familiars, and attended witch gatherings. One thing I remember reading or hearing, and I think it may have been from Unobscured Season 1 with Erin Mankey.
Woo, we love you, Erin.
Is that oftentimes when one of the women confessed, they would name another person who had already been named. So they wouldn't accuse anyone else that the justices didn't already know about. But this evidence on top of the spectral evidence was enough for the jury to convict. Susanna Martin, the elderly Amesbury widow, was also tried that day. And Cotton Mather would call her one of the most impudent, wicked creatures in the world. And she would be convicted and sentenced to death. Next, the court would call Rebecca Nurse. Her case would be much more difficult for the court. The 71-year-old was not a social outcast like Good and Bishop, and she was actually a highly respected member of the Salem town. Rebecca's family had been actively working in her defense, and they solicited testimony that questioned the veracity of Rebecca's accusers. They submitted a petition that was signed by 39 friends and neighbors in support of her innocence. Of course, the prosecution supplied the testimony of spectral evidence from the afflicted girls, but also produced evidence that a panel of women and the surgeon, John Barton, I bet he loved his job, found that what they believed was a witch's teat when they inspected Rebecca. They didn't say where it was, so it wasn't between her vagina and anus, apparently.
I do feel bad for that person, though.
Right?
Because it could have been something really medically serious.
Yeah. Or like a skin tag or something, or a mole.
Right.
The jury returned initially. This part really pisses me off, and it will probably piss you off too.
Do tell.
The jury returned initially with a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom erupted with the not guilty verdict, and the afflicted girls cried out, and several of the judges seemed displeased. Obviously, this is what really makes me angry. Douche Canoe Staunton asked the jury to reconsider. The jury deliberated further, but uncertainty remained. So the foreman came back and asked Rebecca a question. She remained silent, an action that was taken by the jury as guilt. and finally returned with a guilty plea.
Oh,
Yeah. The nurse family complained that Rebecca was nearly deaf and did not hear the question. The foreman of the jury acknowledged that her silence was the principal evidence of her guilt. Despite this obvious miscarriage of justice, the conviction remained. Governor Phipps even granted a reprieve for Rebecca Nurse, but then rescinded it due to the complaints by the afflicted and pressure from an unnamed Salem gentleman. I wonder who that was.
bitches.
So 5 days later, her fellow Puritan saints, to pour salt in the wound, formally turned their backs on her. In her presence, the Salem Town church members unanimously voted to excommunicate her.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Right? One more reason for me to hate the Puritans. What a bunch of jerks.
That's
Assholes.
something that wouldn't, at least you would hope wouldn't happen now.
Yeah. I mean, wait until we talk about Mormons and religious trauma.
Oh.
Just kidding. For all you Mormon listeners, I love you.
Everyone's experience is different.
So we're taking a short break before I get back into the shit show. That I don't know if you guys know that when we start a podcast, we have like a host program where we have to sign up and then it releases the podcast to all the other, to Apple, to Spotify, yada, yada.
Yeah, so you guys know this isn't free. Like, we spend money to do this because we enjoy doing it. But between the platform, the equipment, the materials,
And
it adds up.
yeah. However, I just want to shout out that we have listeners every week from Ireland.
Woo! Slajava.
So hello, Ireland. And we also have a listener from the UK.
Hello, United Kingdom.
Right? And I've been watching, and don't get mad if I don't name your town. So it gives us the information, the stats of downloads for our podcast. So I always see someone from Lansing, Michigan.
Hey, Michigan.
Hello, Lansing. And let me pull up the website real quick. On your episodes, you always get someone from Japan. Japan, if you're listening, I have episodes too. Listen to mine. We have Lansing, Michigan that always shows up. Ooh, in the Netherlands. We see you.
Hello, Netherlands.
Of course, Springfield, Massachusetts.
Whoop, whoop.
We get a lot of listeners from Ashland, Massachusetts.
Ooh, Ashland?
Yeah.
Ooh, where's that?
I don't know, Massachusetts somewhere.
Ooh.
And of course, all of my people in Utah.
Whoop, whoop.
Let's see, what were some other ones? Indiana.
Ooh, hello, Indiana.
We've got Vermont, New Hampshire, Iowa. I think Cresco, Iowa always listens.
Hello, Iowa. I feel very honored to have listeners in Indiana because isn't Crime Junkies established in Indiana?
Yes.
Yes.
I didn't even think about that. But we love Crime Junkies. Arizona, which might be my brother, but
Oh, hey, Arizona.
Houston, Texas.
So Jess, you made that map, right?
I did.
And it's all color coordinated and everything.
Yes,
You should scan it in and put it on the Instagram.
I should. But I also have a challenge to those who listen to us. Ooh, we have a Charleston, South Carolina.
Ooh, Carolina.
Yes. Lancaster, New York, anyway, Mississippi. So I have a challenge, and I'm going to put this map on our Instagram, and we are missing pretty much the middle of the country. We're missing Wyoming, we're missing Kansas,
Nebraska.
South Dakota, Nebraska. So if you are able to get someone in that state to listen to us and proof that you do, tag us at Wicked Wanderings Podcast on Instagram or whatever, then I'll do a little surprise for you.
Ooh, I like surprise. I don't even know what the surprise is, so that's exciting.
Me neither, but I'll figure something out. But no, you'll be getting a surprise. It will be cool. So we just want to get more listeners. We want to reach all 50 states, damn it.
Yes, we do.
So,
But I am very proud of our international listeners
Right?
too. Like, that's awesome.
oh my gosh. Can we be pen pals? Ireland, UK, Netherlands, New Zealand.
South Africa was on there too.
Yes.
We had
South Korea, Canada. And yeah. So you guys are awesome.
We love all of you. We
Yes.
appreciate all of you.
You're going to make me cry. So we need to get back to witchcraft.
Can we also, I don't know when you want to mention it, but can we talk about the article too?
Oh, yes. Go ahead, because you sent it to me, and I need a drink of my hot cocoa that you've most lovingly made me.
So something interesting in our local news here in Western Massachusetts, there was an article put out about ancestors and fellow Wiccans in Salem have asked the state to take the accused that died, unfortunately, to be acquitted. And they're basically put their names back in good standing. So I thought that was amazing.
And what is awesome is because when I saw the article that you sent me, I was thinking it was the rest of the Salem Witch Trials, which I'm pretty sure they've already all been cleared. But no, they mentioned Margaret Jones, which we talked about in our first episode, because she was the first woman in Massachusetts to be tried and executed for witchcraft. And then Goody Glover, who I believe she was the one we talked about her, but it's been like years, it seems. The Goodwin children. So that is awesome that.
Yes, I thought that was
even
amazing.
That long after, yeah. See, Puritans, you should be more like the Wiccans. Just saying. Since you guys are here listening, you must be a fan of the podcast.
Woohoo!
And if you want to show your support, head over to wickedwanderingpodcast.com. Click on the support tab and choose a monthly subscription starting at just $3 a month. Your contributions will directly fuel our podcast production, and as a thank you, we'll give you a shout out in every episode.
Woohoo! And you know what might be fun too? If like we will say your name and like your favorite haunting place, murder mystery, or serial killer, we would love to know.
All right, now back to the show.
Back to the show.
The dynamic in Salem now changed. Previously, the women accused of witchcraft were poor, marginal members of society. But Rebecca Nurse wasn't one of those. The religious, economic, and political standing would normally have protected her. Her conviction demonstrated that almost no one in the colony was safe. The court session continued with Elizabeth Howe and Sarah Wilds. Both were Topsfield women who had been previously accused of witchcraft. And a lot of the evidence in these trials were from earlier periods as well, rather than the events that happened in Salem Village, though both faced spectral evidence from the afflicted. On July 19, 1692, Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Wilds, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Good were carted off to Gallows Hill to be executed. Apparently, Salem town's junior minister, Nicholas Noyes, asked Sarah Good one last chance to confess that she was a witch, so that she would not die a liar. What a douche. To which she replied, "You are a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you will take away my life, God will give you blood to drink."
Ooh.
After Sarah's final words, the executions took place without further incident. Though people remembered Good's curse years later when Noyes suffered an internal hemorrhage, leaving him to die choking on his own blood. Karma's a bitch! Schiff notes that none of these women were part of Paris's congregation. Sarah Good's husband quickly agreed that she was a witch. Jackass. While Frances Nurse...
She
knew
probably
how to...
didn't... Sorry, but she probably didn't give him some the other night. He was like,
Probably
you know,
not.
fuck you.
I had a funny comment, but now it's gone, so we'll continue.
Jessica.
Oh, I was going to say she knew how to pick them, but now it's not that funny. While Frances Nurse devoted whole days to prove that Rebecca was not. Save for Rebecca, all had been in court before, which left them vulnerable. There was another way to make sense of the procession up the hill. It may not have been as evident back then as it is today, but 53 years before the trials, a sloppy Massachusetts clerk had drawn Topsfield's boundary over that of Salem Village. As a result, a portion of southwest Topsfield was, by some reckonings, a portion of northern Salem. A pitched battle ensued, largely on account of the precious resource already in short supply. Wood.
What?
They ran out of wood, timber.
Oh, sorry. I'm a little... I know we both worked today. My brain is just...
Yeah. It's okay.
It's like spaghetti.
At least you made money. I worked for free.
That's what happens when you're in a master's program.
It's true. A long-standing feud divided the Putnams of Salem and the Towns of Topsfield. The Towns was a last name, a family. The Putnams went to court again and again over this land. The courts ruled 4 times in favor of the Towns. And guess who had the maiden name of Town and was from Topsfield?
A Putnam?
Rebecca Nurse.
Oh.
Yes. Sarah Cloyce and Mary Esty, because they were all sisters. The Howes and the Esties were close. Elizabeth Howe and Rebecca Nurse were sisters-in-law, and Sarah Wild's husband had helped establish the contested boundary. There was not a single word mentioned of that land dispute during the trials, and half of the witch accusations filed before July had been Thomas Putnam's. Anne Putnam had accused each of these women. Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Cloyce, and Mary Esty all had the main name of Town. They were in a dispute with the Putnams over land. So, and Anne Putnam had accused each of these women. Putnam filed his last complaint on July 1st. Paris's niece, Abigail, also disappeared from the scene at this time. Something had clearly been resolved, and it just happened to be a different matter than what the judges had in mind. After these executions, the accusations moved from Salem to Andover, while these trials are still going on in Salem. Side note, Hannah, we need to make a trip to Andover because the country's oldest remaining bookstore is in Andover, Massachusetts.
Ooh. I love a good bookstore.
Right? And I see it as our duty to go check it out.
I'm down.
Okay.
I love a good trip.
Right? And a good bookstore. Okay, back to the shit show. The third session of the Court of Oyer and Terminer.
Sounds like a law school, or
Right?
not a law school.
Or Jonathan's furniture store. That's what he said. It starts the first week of August and with the trial and execution of George Burroughs, George Jacobs, John Proctor, John Willard, and Martha Carrier. There are no widows, folk healers, or beggars. But there was a man that petitioned the authorities for a change of venue, who was John Proctor, John Willard, who evaded arrest for a brief period, and George Jacobs, who claimed he was as much of a buzzard as a wizard.
Is it George Jacob Pimer Smith? Right?
Juan Paco Pedro de la Mar. Staunton began... That's the Spanish version. I learned it in high school.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if it was like a Utah thing.
There's a lot of Utah things. Staunton began on August 3rd with the case.
Call us out for footsies again. Cut it
Oh,
out.
that's cute. I love that you left that in. It was adorable. Play footsie.
Sorry.
I didn't even notice this time. You were the one that brought it to my attention, but it's cute. Young love.
Not that young.
Can you guys stop flirting and can we get back to the podcast, please? Staunton began on August...
I have to earn my dollar.
That's true. So, Staunton began on August 3rd with the case against Martha Carrier, who was accused on May 28th. She was apparently the caustic queen of hell, and word on the street was that Martha was a woman so guilty, your mama's so fat, Martha's so guilty that she had been a witch 2 years before she was born.
Okay.
I can't make this shit up.
No, you have no need to because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. Martha appeared before a large crowd. The evidence had piled up steadily since her May hearing. Her sister and 2 of her children had confessed to attending satanic meetings with her and stated that she should be the queen of hell. Carrier hailed from a hot-headed family whose reputation she upheld. Susanna Sheldon showed up again to testify against her, and of course, Thomas fucking Putnam described the tortures that his daughters received at the hand of Martha. The afflicted girls did their usual dramatic flailing, and Hawthorne asked Martha if she saw the ghost that the girls were referring to. And Martha replied, "If I speak, you won't believe me." The afflicted became worse, and the girls' flailing became so severe that their lives were in peril, whatever that means. Hawthorne ordered that Martha be tied hand and foot and carted away. Martha was found guilty and sentenced to hang. John Proctor and his wife, Elizabeth, were both found guilty, largely thanks to the testimony of their servant, Mary Warren, and despite the 2 petitions in their support, with a total of 51 signatures attesting to their good character. In June, John Proctor had been physically examined by 7 men in search for a teat, but nothing suspicious was found. I wonder if they examined his taint for his teat. Although there was plenty... Hi, Mom. Just kidding. Although there was plenty of spectral evidence against John Proctor, his own words and actions often came back to haunt him. Witnesses testified that Proctor threatened or admitted to beating several involved in the witch trials. Both John and Elizabeth were sentenced to death, although Elizabeth's sentence was pushed back as she informed them that she was pregnant. George Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, damn you, Hannah,
Sorry.
was accused by his servant, Sarah Churchill, along with others, including his granddaughter, Margaret Jacobs. And although John Willard didn't have a servant, his in-laws were more than willing to testify against him. They accused him of killing his nephew with black magic. Jacobs, going back to Jacobs, continued to declare his innocence, and he was physically examined for signs that he was a witch. There was a suspicious mark found on his shoulder that was considered a teat. It was about 1/4 inch long, with a sharp pointing drooping downwards on his shoulder. It was said that they ran a pin through it and it did not bleed. Witchcraft! Jacobs was found guilty and sentenced to death. An interesting story about George Jacobs, or rather his body, is that after he was executed, he was buried at Gallows Hill. His family retrieved his body and buried it on their farm. A skeleton was exhumed and then reburied on the farm in the mid-19th century, and it was believed to be Jacobs. The skeleton was then rediscovered by a bulldozer when the property was developed in the 1950s.
Oh.
Safeguarded by Danvers officials, the skeleton was quietly reburied on the Rebecca Nurse farm, complete with the replica 17th century coffin and gravestone in 1992. So, obviously my notes were a little messed up, so we're going back to John Willard. He was actually the deputy constable at the time of the witch trials. He was one of the first people to speak out against them, and he had helped arrest the accused witches and soon began to doubt that so many could be guilty, and he quit his job in protest. Shortly after, big surprise, he was accused of witchcraft by big surprise and Putnam. He was accused a second time by his wife's grandfather, Bray Wilkins, when he fell ill after receiving a cross look from Willard. Willard had fled once. He was named, and after he was examined, the magistrates made it clear that they believed the fact that he'd fled was a sign of guilt. He was also charged with spousal abuse by family and neighbors who reported he abused his wife and beat her often, but he denied those charges, saying that they were all lies. He asked his wife to testify, but she was never questioned, and he was convicted and sentenced to hang. It appears the magistrates saved the best for the last this session. The king of hell himself, Reverend George Burroughs. A large crowd gathered for the event, including the colony's most prominent divine, Increase Mather. Prominent divine. Because Burroughs was a minister, they considered him the ringleader of the witches. And this is one of the Mathers annoys me moments. As Cotton Mather stated that Burroughs had the promise of being a king in Satan's kingdom, now going to be erected. So it was Cotton Mather who said that Burroughs was the king of hell. He had the promise of being a king in Satan's kingdom. Repent and thou shalt be saved. Anyway, okay, I'm done. The court knew that in order to convict a minister, they needed overwhelming evidence. They had roughly 30 witnesses to testify against Burroughs. They testified against the evil actions of his specter and his superhuman feats of strength. 8 confessed witches described him as being the head actor of their hellish rendezvous. I wonder who put them up to that. The torments had to be high drama, and when they attempted to testify against him, they began choking. Burroughs' denials did not impress the court, and he was found guilty and sentenced to hang. An interesting note that I found on the History of Massachusetts.org website is that according to handwriting analysis by Professor Peter Grund of the University of Kansas, the afflicted girls' testimonies were all written by Thomas Putnam. And coincidentally, Thomas Putnam also testified in the trial and used similar language to what was written in the girls' testimony.
Oh. That sounds sneaky.
Shady. 2 weeks later, Burroughs, George Jacobs, John Proctor, John Willard, and Martha Carrier were carted up to Gallows Hill for their execution. The crowd that gathered was a bit unsettled, as 4 men who had previously been regarded as solid members of the community were to be executed. When Burroughs climbed the ladder, he made a compelling speech to express his innocence, complete with the perfect reciting of the Lord's Prayer, a feat believed impossible for a witch. But apparently he could do it.
You know, I know the Lord's Prayer and I would still be nervous in front of a group of people.
Let's hear it right now. I'm just kidding. You don't have to.
See, you put me on the spot. I was like,
Right? Point proven. After the executions, due to the extreme heat at the time, the bodies had been buried immediately, and according to historians, the bodies were hastily thrown into a shallow grave, leaving Burroughs' chin and hand and someone else's foot exposed.
Oh,
Isn't that fucked up?
that's so messed up.
Regardless of how they were buried, some of the dead did not lie long. John Proctor and George Jacobs' families came back after nightfall and removed the bodies of the loved ones and secretly reburied them near their homes. A similar tradition in the Nurse family suggests that family member removed her body as well and buried it in their family cemetery. Accusations continued, but concern for the trials increased, specifically around the use of, once again, spectral evidence. Major Roger Pike Salisbury, did I say that right? Salisbury magistrate wrote to express his concerns to Jonathan Corwin about spectral evidence and stated that he was worried that such a controversial evidence was given too much weight in the trials. He suggested that the court should ultimately let guilty live until further discovery than to put an innocent person to death. At least someone in Salem has a brain, or Salisbury, rather. Despite these concerns, the Court of Oyer and Terminer began another session on September 6th. They heard 6 more cases against Mary Bradbury, Martha Corey, Mary Esty, Alice Parker, and Anne Pudeator. I don't really know. Pudeator. Pudeator? You know what? That's what it is. Pudeator. And Dorcas Hoare. All of which were found guilty and sentenced to hang. Mary Bradbury was a well-respected woman of high social rank, the wife of Captain Thomas Bradbury, and a leading citizen of Salisbury. At her trial, she came with a petition signed by 118 friends and neighbors attesting to her religious devotion and good character. Mary eventually received a temporary reprieve. Her supporters organized her escape from jail and put her into hiding. Mary Esty, on the other hand, her own niece testified against her. And remember that Mary had already been released from prison, but was rearrested 48 hours later because of Mercy Lewis. Even the prison keepers defended the mother of 7, a model prisoner, unfailingly civil and sober. Esty submitted a petition to the bench. The court had allowed them neither counsel nor privilege of pleading their case under oath. she requested a fair and equal hearing of what may be said for them as against them. So it appears to me that whoever tries to fight it will eventually be executed. We see that with John Proctor, Burroughs, Nurse, and now Mary Esty. English law guaranteed those rights, but Stoughton still sentenced Mary to hang. And I have a feeling that Rob wants to take a break. Thank you to Lynn in Springfield. And if you love our podcast and want us to keep doing it, you can make a monthly donation as little as $3 at our wickedwanderingspodcast.com to support all the work that we put in to give you guys a good time. So, wickedwanderingspodcast.com, $3.
.com.
In mid-September, Paris, along with Nathaniel Putnam, visited Martha Corey in prison. Corey greeted them coolly and without the eagerness which she had received them 6 months earlier. Paris found her to be unmoved and justified herself and condemned all that had done anything to her just discovery and condemnation. Those were Paris' words. Her just discovery. What a jerk. He suggested they pray. Can you imagine? Martha had no interest. Paris and Nathaniel Putnam prayed and then announced the dreadful sentence of excommunication against his embittered parishioner. So can you imagine being in jail? Like, what did Paris expect? For Martha to be all accepting and forgiving? I would be mad as hell if I spent the last 6 months in a shitty jail just to be sentenced to death, and then the man who's partly responsible wants me to pray with him. Fuck you, Paris.
Right.
Seriously, these people have lost their minds.
And you know what? The amazing thing is probably God's shaking his head
Right?
at him anyways, but like, dude, what's wrong with you?
I wonder if Martha Corey visited him in hell. Because I think she went to heaven and he didn't. Alice Parker was the wife of a fisherman, John Parker. The couple lived in Salem town, and Alice was a pious, honest woman, but she also had a reputation for clairvoyance and, on one occasion, had successfully predicted that a friend's husband would die at sea. She was accused by Mary Warren, and in May, who claimed Parker had bewitched her mother to death and made her sister ill. Ann Podater was a 70-year-old widow in Salem town, where she worked as a nurse and midwife. She had a reputation for being sharp-tongued and often quarreled with locals. She was accused by many of the afflicted girls, and some of her medical supplies and ointments were confiscated and introduced as objects of the occult. Trying to keep up with the mounting accusations, the court heard 9 more cases the next week and produced 9 more convictions. Big surprise. And these ones are ones I haven't really heard. I think most of the well-known witches are from like the beginnings. So Abigail Faulkner, Margaret Scott, Wilmot Red, and Mary Parker were tried, found guilty, and sentenced to hang. The other 5, Anne Foster, her daughter, Marcy Lacey, Mary Lacey, not Marcy, Samuel Wardwell, Rebecca Eames, and Abigail Hobbs had pled guilty at arraignment. When Samuel Wardwell, when his confession was read to him, he recanted and changed his plea to not guilty. He was quickly tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Out of these 9, only 4, Mary Parker, Wilmot Red, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardell, made it to the gallows, and 1, Anne Foster, would eventually die in prison in December 1692. The court adjourned on September 17th and was not supposed to resume until November. However, there was still something they had to do about Giles Corey. Giles had pled not guilty, but he refused to answer the next question. Would you be willing to be tried by God and country? In the absence of his answer, technically they could not proceed. So the court undertook the very traditional but rarely used strong and hard punishment. They laid Giles down in a meadow between boards and placed progressively more rocks on top of the planks to literally press an answer out of him. He still refused to reply to the question as they piled on rocks. Word has it that Corey's last words were, "More weight," when they asked him to respond. According to Baker, this seems in keeping with what was known of the stubborn and quarrelsome old man who demonstrated such contempt for the court, and the weight finally crushed him to death. Corey had seen the fate of others brought before the court, and he believed his trial would end with his execution. So Corey rather chose to undergo what death they would put to him. The day before his death, the Salem town church excommunicated Giles. And personally, I think he was better off not being a member of that church anyway.
Did him a favor.
Yeah. 3 days later, on September 22nd, 1692, Martha Corey, Margaret Scott, Mary Esty, Alice Parker, and Anne Bodater. I'm sorry. This is not disrespectful to you, Anne. It's just funny. I'm sorry I'm messing up your name. Wilmot Reed, Samuel Wardell, and Mary Parker were executed. The executions gave voice to a growing opposition to the trials. Many of the observers were taken aback by the treatment of Giles Corey, and no one who actually confessed to being a witch had been executed, with the exception of Samuel Wardell, who recanted his confession. However, the outbreak continued to spread. Increased Mather soon took a series of actions to bring a halt to the trials. About fucking time, Mather. He presented a manuscript, Cases of Conscience, to Governor Phipps. October would find the end of the witch trials, but not for the reason you would think. Like, the death of 19 innocent people. But no. On October 12, 1692, Governor Phipps wrote to the Secretary of Privy Council, and this was the first time that Phipps had reported on the witch trials to his superiors in England, and told them he was forbidding any more charges of witchcraft, except under extreme circumstances. Phipps noted in his letter, "I have found that the devil has taken upon him the name and shape of several persons, who are doubtless innocent, and to my certain knowledge of good reputation." But what Phipps didn't mention was that one of the victims recently named was his wife.
Oh,
Lady
so
Mary
convenient.
Phipps. Isn't that just one of the biggest how convenience of the whole story? For reals. Phipps also banned the publications on the subject. The court of Oyer and Terminer was officially disbanded, and there was a creation of a general court that did not accept spectral evidence as evidence. It only took, 6 months, 7 months? Staunton's work came to a sudden halt, and what are you laughing at?
Myself, I apologize.
Hannah's having problems.
I really am. I'm sorry. It was a long day. I apologize.
It's okay. It's okay. Staunton's work came to a sudden halt, and the return to normal took a little longer, economically and emotionally. Orchards, cellars, fences, and wood piles had been sacrificed in the name of justice. There was cause for much soul-searching at the Salem Village parsonage, as anywhere. 5 accusers and 4 of the afflicted lived at that address. More than any other, Paris was not insensitive to the burdens his family had placed on the community. He offered to forego £6 of his 1692 salary to gratify neighbors in an attempt to gain harmony. He made no move to retrieve Tituba, an embarrassment and an expense. She remained behind bars until someone paid her jail costs at the end of 1693, effectively buying her, and she left Massachusetts. And this is the saddest part of all. At the time of her release, little Dorothy Good had spent 8.5 months in jail. Her infant sister died before her eyes, and she had watched her mother, against whom she had testified, head off to the gallows. Dorothy would eventually go insane and would require care for the rest of her life.
Oh.
Isn't that... Ugh. Schiff goes into more of the details about the aftermath of the trials. So please, if you are interested at all, check out her book, The Witches. It's very informative. And one thing that's kind of like karma is that Thomas and Anne Senior Putnam died like within 2 years of the trials. And Anne Putnam, 19, had to take care of, Anne had to take care of 7 children.
Holy moly.
And she died at 19 years old, I think.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Single and destitute. But she was also the only one to apologize.
Wow.
Like, sorry, my parents put me up to it. Just kidding. So before we end this long episode, we want to talk about the theories that I so unbiasedly talked about during the episode.
Go for it.
And some that I have not mentioned. So there's ergot poisoning, which I personally don't believe is a thing.
Now, could you explain what ergot is?
Ergot is, let me check my notes. Isn't it? This doesn't say what it is. I just assumed everybody. But it's a grain, I think. Mold. Anyway, look up ergot. But many historians believe that they got an ergot infestation in Massachusetts that caused strange activities among the women in 1691 that eventually led to the Salem witch hunts. Toxicologists now know that ergot poisoning can lead to convulsions, spasms, hallucinations, crawling sensations on the skin, and erratic behavior.
So I looked up ergot poisoning.
Thank you.
And it is when a person or animal eats food that has been contaminated with a fungus called C. purpurea.
Oh, well, there you go, wanderers.
And like you said, it can cause gangrene, vision problems, confusion, spasms, convulsions, unconsciousness, and death.
Dun, dun, dun. Also, I think the fucking Putnams had a lot to do with it. With the land disputes. That's what I have in my notes. Fucking Putnams. And I think that they just took advantage of an already crazy situation.
Mm-hmm.
And once they had accomplished what they were set out to, like they kind of disappeared from the scene, and then it moved to Andover. There were new people accusing and different people that were being charged. Another thing that I think played an important role was hysteria. Now, hysteria, everything that's been going on in Salem, in the colony, you know, the Wabanaki attacks in Maine, the charters being withdrawn, they were in between those charters at that time. And some of the laws they stuck to, and some of the laws they didn't. It seemed like they were picking and choosing which ones they wanted to follow. So another thing, a recent epidemic of smallpox, the heightened threats of the Indian attack, the economic uncertainties, and small town rivalries may have all primed the people of Salem and its surrounding areas for the mass hysteria that fueled the witchcraft trials.
So basically, it was a perfect storm.
Yes. But my favorite theory, because, you know, I'm in the mental health field, is conversion disorder.
Ooh, do tell.
Have you ever heard of that? Conversion disorder is a psychiatric disorder characterized by signs and symptoms affecting sensory or motor function inconsistent with patterns of known neurologic diseases or other medical conditions and significantly impact the patient's ability to function. The symptoms cannot be controlled at will, not considered to be feigned intentionally by the patient. The term conversion disorder was first mentioned in literature by Sigmund Freud.
Oh, Freud.
It must have been their mothers.
Yeah, right.
Psychological, social, and biological factors can contribute, precipitate, and perpetuate conversion disorder. Often there is trauma, which is present, adverse life events, a ton of it, and acute chronic stressor, preceding symptoms of conversion disorder. Many patients are found to have a history of childhood abuse, both emotional and sexual. Contributing to conversion disorder include poor coping skills and internal psychological conflicts. They are more likely to have a history of multiple somatic complaints, including symptoms like generalized fatigue, weakness, or pain without a known cause. So there's a bunch of models that it aligns with. So I'm just going to read a couple of things and then we'll be done. The psychodynamic models suggest that somatic symptoms of conversion disorder are a product of emotional conflict. This emotional conflict becomes repressed into the unconscious mind and converted into a symptom. Some other models focus on the development of inadequate coping mechanisms and negative interpersonal relationships that develop early in a patient's life. And then cognitive behavioral models suggest that exposure to information related to a specific symptom can lead to the creation of representation in memory. Conversion order then occurs when this representation is activated by an individual worrying excessively about looking for signs of that symptom. This activation passes a specific threshold in the mind where it overrides sensory input and becomes an actual symptom. And these symptoms would explain the rigid body movements in the beginning where it looks like they're going through an exorcist where their bodies are all...
Exorcism, yeah.
Yeah.
So what that last part you were saying, is that kind of when you have people that can be hypochondriacs and be like, oh, I'm getting a sniffle. See, I have my sniffle. And you start getting in your head that you're going to be sick and then you get sick.
Well, and this could also explain why both Abigail and Betty started fits at the same time, because maybe one started first and then the other one followed after. I get this when I hate throwing up, hate it. And when I know I've been around somebody with a stomach bug, then my stomach starts to feel, I'm like, am I getting sick?
Yeah.
Am I going to puke? But that's on a lesser level. But so that for me, I think is the most reasonable one to explain all the weird behavior that was not faked. I think some of it was fake. Looking at you, Ann Putnam. But I think that, like you said, the Salem Witch Trials were just a perfect storm of years of stress, of economic stress, of the fear of the Native American attacks. And I think it just, plus the testosterone of the judges.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like you had talked about the no charters and everything, this was getting to a point where I'm sure they felt they were separating from England a lot. And like you said, it's not near the revolutionary, as close to the Revolutionary War. But they're probably started like, well, we're kind of on our own. Like, yeah, the king can send over whatever he wants, but we're on our own over here.
Yeah. And I mean, it takes months for anything to get back and forth.
I do want to give a huge shout out to you, though. This was a lot. This was 5 episodes, and you did a lot of work. So clap for me.
I can think about other things. Sorry if it was a little much.
I really think you should get a doctorate just because of all the work you did on this.
Yeah. I could have done, like I said, a whole season. Maybe someday, because I still want to read thoroughly some of the books I had.
Absolutely. But I think we can totally do something.
Maybe not. No, maybe in 2 years. I need a break.
You deserve that break.
Yes. But there we go. I hope you enjoyed. And I hope I wasn't thoroughly... You know what? I'm okay being thoroughly biased about how it went down because it was bullshit.
Well, and I think that's what's great about a podcast. We can say how we feel.
Yeah. I hate the Putnams.
We should get merch that says that. The fucking Putnams.
But anyway, so there you have it, Wanderers. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
And we're all going to bed. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for listening today. This show wouldn't be possible without our amazing producer and editor, Rob Fitzpatrick, who works tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you the best content.
And a special thanks to Taiga Soundprod for providing the captivating intro music, Cinematic Intro 24.
And of course, we can't forget the hauntingly beautiful outro music, Rhino's Theme, composed by Kevin MacLeod.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms, like Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Your feedback means the world to us.
Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes glimpses, updates, and more thrilling content. You can find us at Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our Wicked Wanderings community. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Stay curious,
keep exploring,
and always remember to keep on wandering.